Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. Today we are talking about the Heisenberg, a New Mexico tournament that was thrown on by Tavern of Souls Gaming. Major shout out to Tavern of Souls for helping me get out to this super sweet cEDH tournament. We're going to be talking about the course of this tournament. We had 131 players, 6 rounds of Swiss, and a cup to top 16. It was a super sweet tournament. And we have some pretty spicy lists in this top 16. I'm not going to lie. There are some lists that are a little bit standard, a little bit well known, but boy, did some folks really bring the heat this weekend. Without any further ado, I say let's jump into these deck lists. But before we start with that, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe button, as it helps out the channel a whole lot and it costs you literally nothing. Also, feel free to check out patreon.com/comedianmtg if you're interested in supporting the channel. I know we talked about having a bit of a stretch goal coming up here to potentially get a camera for the channel. We're still a bit of a ways off of that, but also we've got some pretty cool stuff coming down the pipeline. I know for me personally, that's definitely a goal that I'm going to get to after I get married, which is, if you're watching this at time of release, in like 9 days. So yeah, it might be a little bit gone over the next week, but in the meantime, let's break down the top 16 of the cEDH tournament. In 16th place, we have Smoked Whitefish Salad. I am the one who knocks the Heisenberg. This is by Max P, to be clear. This is Max P's list that he ended up doing well with way back in the Festival of Nights tournaments, which was, I believe, in November of last year. This is a Timnathrasios build, and you can argue, as I have done, that it's basically one of the Timnathrasios builds that kicked off that like 2 or 3 months of Timnathrasios kind of being back on top. It's very classically mid-range, works in a lot of the flash packages, and is a deck that grinds very, very hard. I remember talking with Max during the course of the tournament, basically about this idea of like how the list can get locked into maybe a few too many draws just because of the fact that it does the grind thing, and that's like the epitome of what the deck does. Is it grinds harder, grinds harder, grinds harder. So one of the interesting choices you'll notice here is that Grand Abolisher is in this list, but Max has chosen not to add Voice of Victory to the list. A little bit not as in favor of the new Grand Abolisher style effect. I would summarize his thoughts on that, but I'd love to hear from his own words, which hopefully Max, for watching, much with the in the description down or in the comments down below. That'd be super awesome. A lot of value engines here. For win conditions, you obviously have the Devoted Druid and Hazel's Brewmaster combo, and I'm pretty sure there's also a Swift reconfiguration in here, which there is. Both of those create artifact variants of Devoted Druid, which then allows you to tap and untap them an unbounded amount of times. One of Max's innovations with this list has been having the Birthing Pod line in the deck, basically mostly there to just sack creatures, turn them into higher value creatures, vis-a-vis Grand Abolishers, things like that. But also good for just whipping out a combo piece when you might need it. As you notice, no Basalt Monolith in here, even though we do have Kinnan as sort of a value inclusion in the deck. It really does seem like the main win conditions are just Oracle Consult, Oracle Tainted Pact, and those infinite manas with Devoted Druid style combos. I know at one point, okay, so he is still playing Retraction Helix, even though has very few ways that actually pays off in the deck. Very, very low artifact count in this list. So you either have to have Mox Amber online or go infinite colorless with Mana Vault, Soul Ring, and those are really the only ways actually to be able to loop the Retraction Helix combo over and over again. For those who need a little more context on that combo, you enchant a bird, frog, otter, or rat with the Retraction Helix spell that we just highlighted earlier. And as long as you have a Valley Flood caller out, every time you're casting a non-creature source, you are able to bounce the mana rock over and over again. And so therefore, if you're casting it, it triggers itself, bouncing it, making infinite mana, and then you're able to pump that into your commander Thrasios. Same thing with the Devoted Druid combo. Just a lot of generic value for this deck. That's sort of the name of the game when it comes to this archetype. We are seeing the new Nature's Rhythm featured, and I believe there's also the new Mist Rise Village in the mana base. There is 27 lands here, a lot of mono and colorless lands. But some of these 4-color mana bases can kind of get away with it. It's yeah, when the grind is hard and you're able to draw a bunch of cards, turns out you can afford some spicy inclusions in the land slots. Congrats, Max, for making top 16. Here we have Knickknack with cEDH Fent Bird, also known as Kopdama, Discount Derevi, and Ragthras, but with extra steps. This is an Ishai Kodama build, and I actually had to play against this deck in the Swiss of this tournament, and it looked pretty sweet. There was a period of time there where the deck was just facilitating the grind plan, right? Just playing the normal Bant card advantage plan, right? With things like Fairy Mastermind, Archivist, Esper. I believe there was an early Trouble in Pairs out for this list. And then it eventually was able to get its commander out, Kodama, and that's when things started to get pretty nutty. As far as win conditions in this deck, we have Teferi with Displacer Kitten, which is a pretty sweet classic combo that we know. Basically, at this point, you're basically flickering Teferi and then bouncing your mana rocks to your hands over and over again. Interesting amount of ramp here in the list. Actually, a little bit less than I was expecting, but you definitely have a lot of the big hitters like Mana Vault, Grim Monolith, etc. And obviously, Smothering Tithe definitely helps when you have a combined 10 mana value in the command zone. I don't really think Ishai is a really big part of the game plan here. I think it's more for the blue-white colors. And then you have a lot of permanence in the deck, and specifically a decent amount of permanence with Flash, which definitely helps with this game plan when you finally get your commander onto the battlefield. For those who haven't messed around with Kodama decks a lot, the big selling point of playing Kodama in the zone is that as soon as Kodama hits the field, your deck basically adds a 0 to the amount of lethality. You know, if you consider this deck 10% scary, it becomes 100% scary, right? Like it is a very, very powerful commander at basically just cheating out the best things in your hand. The crazy part about this deck is that as soon as Kodama hits the field, almost every spell becomes as long as it's 2 mana or higher. Okay, as soon as this permanent enters the battlefield, maybe I'm sneaking in a Grand Abolisher, right? Which becomes a very dangerous mini game with Kodama, and basically ensures that either the player has to, you know, enter some sort of verbal confirmation that they're not going to be doing that, right? Or it means that you just kind of have to remove Kodama at the earliest capacity here with this deck. It definitely creates you know, a decent amount of scary situations. And I believe I talked to Eric after the Swiss of the tournament, and he mentioned being able to cheat in Grand Abolisher like 3 or 4 times over the course of this tournament. What's really cool is also the flash effects, things like Solitude and Subtlety. If Kodama sees those, suddenly you're able to cheat in something with lesser or equal mana value, right? So Solitude coming in means you can cheat in anything 5 mana value or less, while also getting the ability of Solitude, which is pretty insanely sweet, right? So for a spell you're literally paying 0 mana for, you can potentially cheat in a 5-drop that sticks around, which is very, very crazy. We also have the Hi-Fi Trickster here. You've also got Valley Flood Caller here, right? So a lot of ways to actually pay off for basically having those high value plays here. Um, the deck also plays Aether Channeler, which is another way to go infinite with your Displacer Kitten, because you can use the return another target non-land permanent to its owner's hand mode and have that loop over and over again. Those are the main like hard win conditions I see with the deck, to be honest. The rest of them feel like you just grind your opponents into the dirt with a bunch of value. I think there are some lines with Felidar Guardian that I am unfamiliar with here in the deck. I know Felidar Guardian is just like a good value piece in general for the list, because as you flicker another creature or another permanent, those permanents will be re-entering, and therefore Kodama will see them enter the battlefield, which is obviously insanely strong. But as I said, I'm not really sure exactly what the other non-displacer kitten win lines are here in this deck. Eric, or anyone who knows Eric, definitely let me know if you y'all know any specific lines that I may or may not be missing as far as win conditions are concerned. But this deck is insanely sweet. I think it's very, very powerful. And it does a lot of absolutely crazy stuff, to say the least. It's a very sweet list here. Oh, am I seeing a bounce land in here? Okay. Usually bounce land plus Kodama means some sort of combo at some point. Okay, that's probably where another one of our win lines lies. I know, for example, you can make infinite treasure and infinite food, unless I'm mistaken, because as your bounce land comes in, uh, Kodama will see the treasure token you make off the landfall trigger. Okay, so there's the infinite treasure, infinite food line you can do here with Tireless Provisioner, although you're not exactly winning with infinite treasure, infinite food. Obviously, it helps. And when you have infinite mana, obviously, it's very easy to be able to assemble alternate win conditions here. But I have a feeling there is some intensely complicated line here that I potentially might be missing. There's also I do notice that there's like Delny plus Flesh Duplicate plus Felidar Guardian, which if you copy Felidar Guardian with the Delny out, that means you are able to make infinite mana because now you're double enter the battlefielding with Felidar Guardian and the clone of Felidar Guardian. So there's a lot of really cute, it's kind of like Playcon in a sense, where like there's a lot of strange, weird layering with flicker combos here, but a lot of cool stuff in this cEDH deck. And the fact that once again you can sort of cheat in all these high mana value permanents through Kodama's ability is definitely pretty sweet, while also in the meantime playing a patient grindy game, using the best of Bant to be able to get you a decent amount of advantage. So congrats to Eric for bringing this super spicy list to this tournament. Do you want to pick up any of the cards we've talked about here today? I know there's a number of spicy decks and a number of spicy options, so I know I'll be grabbing some singles from ToaMagic.com. ToaMagic is an amazing vendor. They have a crazy selection of inventory. They also have amazing pickup and shipping features. They have super quick shipping options, as well as the ability to pick up at location of major events. So if you're heading to a Star City Games, a MagicCon, things like that, or maybe one of the larger qualifying RCs, you're probably going to see Toe Magic have a booth at those locations. ToeMagic.com to find out your single needs are taken care of, and use code Comedian to get 5% off your order. We have Mana Crypt here with Grixis for Cowards. This is a Timnachrom blue farm list, and it looks to be a pretty standard blue farm list. Definitely a decent amount of creatures in this variation. I'm guessing before even scrolling down to the instance that with all these red creatures is probably a flare in the, yep, flare of duplication. Yeah, there's sort of this schism now between the flare variants of blue farm and the non-flare variants. Now obviously gifts ungiven was just unbanned in cEDH, so it was not played during the course of this tournament, but it does seem that these are the players live lists. So we can actually just go down here to the recent history tab in Moxfield, and that shows you, okay, so yeah, post tournament, gifts ungiven was added, Necropotence was added, Opposition Agent was added, and Bergie was added, and we lost. Necro was added and then taken away too. Okay, so yeah, Oppo was taken out, Bergie was taken out again. I guess there was some swapping back and forth, but yeah, okay. This is the changes that were made post tournament, but basically Necro out, or Necro went out and then back in. Strange. Okay, I'm not really sure what that's about. Um, but anyways, yeah, this is our cEDH deck. Obviously updated by a couple of days, but it's a pretty classic blue farm list. You're either trying to win with Thassa's Oracle plus Demonic Consultation or Tainted Pact. We have the new Voice of Victory here, which is amazing in these Timna decks, able to absolutely shut your opponents out of interacting on your turns while also giving you 3 bodies for Timna. We all know how bad this is for the format at this point. This card is absolutely insane. Bergie was maybe in the tournament. We're not sure at this point with all the swaps in and out, but definitely a solid inclusion here. This is definitely like one of the more faster inclined versions of this variation, which makes sense because the name Grixis for Cowards definitely indicates that the Grixis first game plan is much more the priority here with this blue farm variant. But congrats to our pilot for top 16. We have Dean Peaches here with Kinney Boy. This is a Kinnan variation here in this top 16, and it definitely seems to be one of the newer grind Kinnan lists that has been coming out, right? Using things like Mirror Maid, Copy Enchantment, Copy Artifact, Mystic Grimoire, Heuristic Study, right? A lot of value engines here with this grindy Kinnan variation. Dean and I actually did play during the Swiss of this tournament, and absolutely had the turn 3 in a pod in which I mulled down to 4 and everyone else just kept a bunch of mana with no counter spells. So was able to clean up that pod immediately during the Swiss, which was pretty sweet. Yeah, Kinnan here, as I said, this is one of those grindy variations that is starting to pick up popularity. You can tell it's the Commandeer variant. Dean is also a very good friend of Freedom Waffles, so their lists are pretty similar, and we'll talk about Freedom's list as we go through the course of this tournament. But right now, this Kinnan variant is, as I mentioned, pretty well positioned and continuing to do pretty well in tournament settings. You have Hullbreaker and Tidespout to balance your mana rocks infinitely as your one of your win conditions. You have Basalt Monolith plus your commander to make infinite colorless mana, and a number of different ways to filter that mana to infinite mana of every color. You've got some cool pieces here like Amphibian Downpour as a little bit of control option here, and some sweet stuff. Definitely congratulations to Dean for their top 16. So we have here not a coper, just a farmer. So this list is actually going to show up twice because Braden and Colin, who were both players who top 16 this event, play the exact same 99 cards or 98 cards. I guess I should say. Well, it's 100 cards, right? But with the two commanders. Yeah, no, they play the exact same blue farm variant, and it's definitely much more of a mid-range control-ish blue farm variant. I actually ended up getting to play both of them over the course of this tournament. Braden during Swiss and Colin during the top 16. So this placement here that I have in front of me is one from earlier in the top 16, and then Colin's record was a little bit better, and so we'll talk about his technically later as well. Let's compare our last blue farm list to this variation. It is also worth noting that this version was also adjusted in the post Gifts Ungiven world. The two pilots that we were talking about were not playing Gifts Ungiven, and they were on Ad Nauseum. So let me just double check their recent swaps here. Okay, so they made a couple. Let me expand. So, oh, they've actually made a ton of things. Okay, they removed a bunch of stuff from their sideboard. Um, Okay, this is a little bit confusing. So they removed Cyclonic Rift. They added to the main board, so it's no longer in their sideboard. What did they remove from the main board? So they took out Floodmaw. So Floodmaw was in the main board. Legislature was in the main board. Culling the Week was in the main board. Oh wow, they've made a lot of changes since the course of this tournament. But when did Adnos get cut? Because that was okay, so I think these are the changes that actually happened like right after the tournament. But yeah, Ad Nauseam was cut for Gifts Ungiven during the course of this tournament, and Fairy Mastermind was cut for the One Ring. So those are the big changes that I think we're looking out for in this list. But either way, let's compare it to our other list that we were talking about earlier. So the farmer variant, definitely playing, as I mentioned, a few more controlling pieces. And the one I really wanted to highlight was Supreme Verdict, as that card came up pretty consequentially during the course of our games in both pods. Funny enough, able to whip out Supreme Verdict to control the board state and make some pretty impactful plays where players were, through cards like Fairy Mastermind, Thrasios, etc., Seedborn Muse, all those types of high value permanents. They were dominating the board state, and these not a Coper blue farm variations are definitely ones in which they're trying to slow the game down a decent amount. They're trying to have high value plays, very much a Esper forward blue farm variation, and Supreme Verdict able to sweep up those board states when your opponents are relying much more heavily on the board, as green decks tend to do, is a pretty intelligent choice to have for these variations. They're also on Deluge, basically doing the exact same thing with these variations. But as I mentioned, Verdict came up in multiple games and definitely put in the work. Notably, both of them on Jeweled Amulet as well, just for that little bit of early acceleration. We were actually talking about that a decent amount, as they kind of knew I was a Jeweled Amulet fan. But they mentioned, testing it out in Blue Farm, being very happy with it just because of the extra consistency it was adding to those opening hands and things like that. And especially when you're playing a bit more of a grindier version of the deck. Interesting to see that even though they're on a lighter creature package, they are on Diabolic Intent and Demonic Council for the list as well. And then the Grixis for Cowards variation, as I mentioned, more red creatures, Flare of Duplication, they're still on ad nauseum. The Necropotence lines and Beseech and all those things, the heavy black turbo plan, definitely much more available in Hunter's list, the list we covered earlier today. So definitely significantly different variations of the same blue farm archetype. Speaking of which, we have another blue farm here. This is Lost Waldo with another T and K variant. Definitely were a decent amount in this top 16. Yeah, and now obviously another list that has added gifts ungiven since the time of this tournament. Kind of wish they had maybe frozen the deck lists a little bit so that we could see what they were playing at the course of this event. But it is nice to know what the pilots have already updated to in the changes since the event. So this one's a little bit easier to follow along to. Demonic gifts. Oh, that must have been a typo. So as gifts ungiven was added and toxic deluge was taken out of this variant. So replace gifts as you see it here with a toxic deluge. But here we have another blue farm variant, and we'll compare it to our not a Coper build. So difference here being they were both on ad nauseum at the time of the event. We are seeing the Mirror Made dramatic reversal tech a little bit in Lost Waldo's version. Flood Caller was not in the Cooper build, which is very interesting. And Commandeer, definitely a larger, grindier piece here. So this deck's very interesting in the sense that it's playing a little bit more into the ad nause style. But instead of having a bunch of board wipes, is playing more value creatures like Archivist, Fairy Mastermind, etc., and a few more value engines like Flood Caller, Mirror Maid, and Commandeer in this variation, compared to a few more lands, funny enough, in the Not a Coper build. The One Ring, which once again was not in that variation, this was a Fairy Mastermind, so they were sharing that originally. Ragavan not in the other variation, funny enough, even though this version is higher on board wipes and talismans. So interesting swaps there from these blue farm decks. We have Bingy Longtooth, or Bingy, I don't know, with Grixis Kark, the Sycophant, Too Deep. This is one of the Too Deep crew out here. Um, and Andre is an awesome player. Someone who I obviously, having spent a lot of time at the 2D crew, someone I get to talk to a decent amount. And one of the things a number of the people from the 2D crew did over the course of this tournament was to cut Ristic Study. As you can see by the description here, Ristic Study is the tool of knaves and charlatans. The oppressors shan't silence the righteous. So yeah, this is a Grixis Krark variation that is not playing Ristic Study just cause. I talked with Andre about this over the course of the tournament. He was like, "Oh yeah, no, I recognize that it is a strictly bad choice to not play Ristic Study in this deck, but I'm trying to prove a point." And you know what? Was still able to top 16 while dying on that hill. So it's pretty sweet Grixis Krark variation here. Andre's been really high on Grixis Krark even pre-ban, and so really cool to see him take this list and top 16 a pretty largely sized tournament with it. What you'll see when you look at Grixis Krark is definitely commitment to the Krark plan, things like Veyran and Harmonic Prodigy and Tavern Scoundrel, right? But also an acknowledgement, I would guess, of the fact that this is still Grixis Turbo option, right? So some pretty cool stuff here with this variation. I mean, you're still on Necrodominance, you're still on Necropotence, you're still on Ad Nauseum, right? And I think some people might be a bit confused with the idea that, like, yeah, you could put an ad nause in the stack and then lose the flip and then put the ad nause back into your hand. But honestly, there are many times in which you very intentionally do not have your Krark on the battlefield when you are going for those types of lines, right? There are times when you give into the Krark plan for this deck, and there are times when you give into the generic Grixis Turbo option for this deck as well. Cool to see Ral in the 99 of decks. I think most Storm decks should be playing this in the 99 anyways. This card is quite an overperformer when it comes to Storm options. It just becomes a Goblin Electromancer that flips over into a Mind's Desire at some point, which is pretty dang sweet. So you can move with the traditional means. You have Thassa's Oracle plus Demonic Consultation and Tainted Pact, which is also really interesting too, because if you ever win a flip with Tainted Pact with Krark, there's this really interesting spot where you basically get to Tainted Pact down to your Oracle and then use the copy to Tainted Pact the rest of your library and then just play Oracle and win the game, which is pretty sick line available here. Intuition, I'm not really sure what the exact pile is for the Intuition pile in this deck. However, as I said, there are other traditional means here. So you do have your traditional Underworld Breach plus LED and Brain Freeze lines as one of your win conditions. You have the Oracle, as I mentioned. You can Demonic Betrayal your opponents just like usual, but also there's these fun, classic Kark Sakashima lines, right? Where you basically have a Kark doubler and a Kark doubler, and then you just start doing the Storm thing and getting a ton of value with your Kark in the command zone, flipping a bunch of coins, striking it rich, Jessica's willing, etc., etc. Is this tech on Git Probe? It is. Yeah. Okay. Cool. 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 Because with any doubler, Git Probe plus Kark, it's absolutely nutty, and it's worth paying all the life that you're going to end up paying. But really sweet to see this very spicy cEDH Grixis Kark variation take down a top 16 slot here. While also dying on the no Ristic Study hill, which is very, very funny. Really cool stuff here from Andre on this variation. And yeah, I definitely suggest that people who enjoy the Kark plan definitely give this deck a shot. I know statistically, whenever I play Kark, I lose maybe like 80% of the flips. So not a deck for me, but I love it for people who love this type of stuff. If you enjoy storing your decks in high quality products, look no further than Heavy Play. Heavy Play has been a partner of this channel for quite some time, and they continue to be so because I absolutely adore working with them. I think they make insanely good products. I use Heavy Play products for literally all of my cEDH gaming. I have their deck boxes, their deck box holders, I have the extra playmat tube. I absolutely love using their products, and I use them all the time. The deck box and playmat and dice tray setup is something I use for every single tournament because it is so convenient. It's so nice not to have to rummage through my boxes for a separate thing for tokens and a separate thing for deck boxes and a separate thing for this, that, and the other thing. It's just all in one convenient location, and I truly adore it. Heavy Play has made grinding cEDH convenient and easy, and I absolutely love having my cards in a nice, safe storage space. So if you're interested in getting a little bit off your order, use code Comedian at checkout and get 10% off your order. And as I mentioned, they've got some new products on the site, the things like the deck box holders, the playmat tubes. They also have brand new art playmats that look absolutely sick. They have a whole Mox series as well as a Black Lotus function. So there's some pretty cool stuff available. So we have PRXZ, also known as Kevin, with Turbo Dawnwaker Heisenberg 2025. Kevin is here top 16ing with Zerda the Dawnwaker. And this is one I definitely know some people are going to ask me to read. This is a card that could be your companion, but instead is the commander. And abilities you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 less to activate. The effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana, and you can tap to make a creature not block this turn. What was really cool is that Kevin and I worked together for coaching like 3 days before this tournament. And Kevin's also one of the folks who hangs out with the Two Deep crew. Very, very cool individual playing a super sweet and spicy deck here. This is Zerda the Dawnwaker. So for those who aren't familiar with the Zerda combos, the easiest way to explain them is that with either Grim Monolith or Basalt Monolith, while Zerda can't reduce any mana making abilities, what Zerda can reduce is the ability to untap these permanents, right? So, for example, with Basalt Monolith here, it has the ability to untap for 3 generic mana, but with Zerda on the battlefield, it only costs 1. So therefore, Basalt Monolith can tap for 3 and untap for 1, making it go infinite. Same thing with Grim Monolith. It can untap for 4, tap for 3, meaning that with Zerda on the battlefield, it can untap for 2 and tap for 3, making infinite generic mana, or infinite colorless mana, I should say. And a significant portion of the rest of the deck is ways to dump that infinite colorless mana into some pretty cool stuff. The classic option here is Walking Ballista to machine gun down your opponents. You also have Cogwork Assembler that allows you to make infinite hasty copies of a target artifact, including itself, so you can make infinite 2/3s and attack your opponents to death. You have Thran Spider, which allows you to look at the top 4 cards of your library, reveal an artifact, basically goes and searches for any of your other artifacts and puts them all into your hand. There's a number of other ones. Some classic options here like Staff of Domination, draw you through your entire deck. Seems pretty good. The Mana Rig, which allows you to basically double demonic tutor through your whole deck if you have infinite mana. Planar bridge allows you to just put any permanent onto the battlefield, which is pretty crazy. You can make an infinite powered creature that can tap with Umbral Mantle. A lot of really, really cool stuff here for that post infinite really dump here with the deck, basically. And you may be asking, okay, I get the concept of this deck. How did this make the top 16? Right? It's pretty simple. This deck is blisteringly fast. It is a deck that was able to threaten multiple turn 2, turn 3 wins, and not only turn 3 wins. A lot of the time, they were turn 3 wins with things like Grand Abolisher and Voice of Victory. The deck can also grind, which is really interesting. Also, I should mention that Metalworker is a backup win condition in the deck. If you reveal enough artifacts with Metalworker, and then you get an untap effect like Umbral Mantle, you can also generate infinite mana that way as well. And I'm pretty sure with Staff of Domination, you can too, because if you make 5 mana, Staff of Domination also allows you to untap Metalworker infinitely. So that's all pretty sick. And allows you to find a number of different ways to infinitely generate infinite colorless mana. So a lot of sweet stuff here in the course of this deck. Kevin is a big fan of interacting in ways that folks are not exactly ready for him to do so, right? Now, I think everyone expects like the Pyroblast, the Red Blast, but there's definitely a lot of interaction here, right? Orm's Chant and Silence. There's a Tibalt Trickery and a Reprieve. When Kevin and I were talking, Reprieve was one that he mentioned quite a big deal. I think it's definitely a Kevin favorite. This card is a very good tempo counter spell. What's really cool about this deck is that you get to break parity on things like Aethersworn Canonist because you're trying to sort of just artifact storm after you make infinite mana. So that part's pretty sweet. This deck takes amazing use of the Goblin Welder and Goblin Engineer to tutor artifacts to get them in and out of your graveyard, etc., etc. Oswald Fiddlebender is another powerhouse in this deck. Really, really sweet, powerful stuff here. I was talking to Kevin after his top 16 match, and unfortunately, there was a solid chance that he actually could have won the whole thing. He had one of his combos stopped under a Beseiju, or with a Beseiju under a Grand Abolisher, but missed the second half of Beseiju, allowing him to go get a second land after the thing was blown up, and that actually would have been exactly enough mana for him to put a second combo on the stack under that Grand Abolisher, and probably would have been able to win that game. So not only did Kevin top 16 this tournament, there is a solid chance that things could have been very different had he made top 4 as well. So congrats to Kevin for absolutely crushing it over the course of this tournament. I think he ended Swiss with like 16 points, which is pretty awesome for this deck. I mean, most folks probably wouldn't even blink twice when looking at this deck in the pod, but proceeded to put multiple people in the ground on turn 2, turn 3 with it, and then is able to still play a really cool grind game as well. You'll notice that there is a breach in the deck, but the breach in this deck is just value. There's no, and there's like an LED, and I think there's a wheel here, right? But there's not even a wheel. But yeah, it's just literally to recur your combo pieces. It's not like any sort of, there's no grinding station or anything like that in the deck. It's just a value breach to go, oh hey, you blew out my combo, we're gonna do that again. Same thing with Sabine's Reclamation here with this list. But I definitely encourage folks who are curious to give this deck a really good look through, because there's so many cool things here in this variation. And a lot of it is meant to protect your combos, to give yourself a second chance at assembling said combos, and go from there. But congrats to Kevin for making top 16 with this super spicy list. Super proud to see this deck pop off. I know that Kevin's been working on this deck for a really long time, and definitely glad to see it get the respect it deserves because the list is super sweet. And one other personal thing that made it really cool was that Kevin and I finished Swiss exactly one place apart. So next is my list. We have myself here with this top 16 with Glurb 3. I am the one who glurbs. This is my Glarb Calamities Augur variation. This is a follow-up to the list that I brought to the Hunter Burton Memorial tournament and made top 4 with. I am still really, really happy with this deck. It felt very, very strong over the course of the tournament. There were definitely some rounds I felt like where the mana situation was a bit of a choke point for me, where I would need to potentially maybe look at adding a 29th land to the deck, which is something I've thought for quite some time. But then there were other games where, I really hated seeing even more land drops over the course of the tournament. Um, our top 16 game was intensely grindy. Definitely a game in which the player who won definitely had a lot of advantage from the start of the game. And I was mentioning to Colin, who was also in our top 16, that I think we definitely fought pretty hard. It ended up being like a 2.5 hour game. And that it was one of those situations where we were definitely fighting an uphill battle the entire time, because one deck sort of got away with a lot of value very early on, and the game got very nuanced. But still super happy with this top 16 run. I ended the Swiss with 17 points, so 3 wins, 1 loss, and 2 draws, which I was super happy with. And then obviously lost in the top 16. So very, very happy with my run here with Glarb. Glarb is still feeling very, very solid. For those who haven't seen the deck before, how do we win? So there's a couple different ways. There's Oracle in the deck, but there is no demonic consultation. Long story short on that, I ended up bringing this deck to a tournament the first time and killing myself with the demonic consultation. So I said, no, thank you. We're just not gonna do that. And I didn't really find the card very helpful. So I ended up swapping it with a scheming symmetry, which comes up literally all the time with Glar because you can cast stuff off the top of your library. The other win conditions in the deck, the new one I added was Kitsa plus dramatic reversal. Basically, if you have the normal dramatic reversal conditions, right? So if you have the ability to pay 2 mana into Kitsa's ability, plus if you've cast 2 instant or sorceries or non-creature spells, I should say, and can get Kitsa's powers up to 3, which, dramatic reversal is one of them. You really only need one other spell. You're able to provide infinite untaps for all of your spells. And then if you have your commander onto the battlefield, you're able to surveil through your deck until you get to, in this situation, probably the Etherflex Reservoir that's in our deck, and able to, put a lot of activations on the stack. Now, interestingly, with the dramatic reversal, it doesn't quite work as well because you're not casting a spell over and over again, but we've also been able to surveil through our entire deck at that point. So we should be able to have a different answer there. You're also able to hypothetically generate infinite mana, so you can cast everything on your deck that costs 4 or more. And then as soon as you hit Bolas' Citadel, you then can start casting the majority of your spells from your deck. So very easy way to win with that variation. The win that I think is up there for the most wins with this deck is actually just Valley Flood Collar lines. I only play Retraction Helix in the deck, but Valley Flood Collar plus Helix plus the Mana Rocks, like we talked about earlier with the Max P build, is something that I win with quite a lot in the deck. And as I mentioned, you just surveil down into the Aetherflux Reservoir. I didn't really specify with the dramatic reversal thing. I enjoyed playing dramatic reversal in the deck. Kitsa was just okay over the course of the tournament. To be honest, it didn't. It felt quite underwhelming as far as 2 mana investments. It wasn't bad necessarily. It might just be one of those pieces that is like eating your vegetables. It gets the job done, but it definitely did not feel super exciting going for the Kitsa dramatic plan in the deck. Now, dramatic reversal did come up when I was storming and things like that, so it definitely felt really good when I go for my more proactive lines, right? The Necropotence and the Bolus Citadel and stuff like that. So I think it's probably going to stay in the deck, even if Kitsa does go away. I found that Dramatic Reversal was just helpful enough that it was worth including because of how much of a burst of mana it could probably give you. Um, so for that reason alone, Kitsa might just stay, even though the win condition I described is not super overwhelmingly powerful in my opinion. I am on Necropotence, as I mentioned. I think that this deck is a lot worse without Necropotence. I think this is one of the pieces that allows you to transition into a faster deck, and in fact was able to win my last round of Swiss because of Necropotence. Basically I looked at 2 non-blue Dargo decks and a Ragthras that had mulligan down to 4 and said, okay, I need to be the person being proactive in this game. I looked at an opening hand with a Imperial Seal into a Cabal Ritual, and I said, okay, that's a Necropotence game plan, right? and sent like a 20-something life Necropotence on the third turn of the game, was able to get there. The other main way this deck wins is through getting a Bolas's Citadel out. With Bolas's Citadel, you're able to assemble Sensei's Top and Aetherflux Reservoir, generating a high amount of spells cast per turn, and then able to nuke your opponents with the Aetherflux Reservoir. I truly adore this deck because this is one of the main ways to win with the deck. Bolas's Citadel is one of my favorite cards of all time, and the fact that this is a deck that highly supports that win condition just makes me super, super happy. I'm very, very happy with that win condition, and I have a ton of fun playing it in this deck. So the Kits of Dramatic Lines were the big changes from the last time I played this deck in Texas. This is the best Calling Ritual deck in the format. I'm very convinced of. It just wins every time you resolve a Calling Ritual, and it's very, very powerful at doing exactly that. And yet there are another number of scenarios in which Calling Ritual becomes a necessity for the table, right? I think, this is a deck where you have to be willing to resolve a Calling Ritual and then not win the game. However, you got to make sure that you're not blowing yourself out too bad if that's a situation you end up in. Seaborn Muse is a card that I am thinking of removing from the deck, to be honest. It's just that other decks do it better, and you're surveilling 2 every turn, and you're keeping up interaction, and it is nice because I genuinely think folks are much more inclined to actually let you keep a Seaborn compared to your opponents. However, as I mentioned, we're playing in a clone meta, and when everyone's like sort of at parity and you can stick a Seedborn and it's not that big of a deal, that's great, right? Because once again, you're just surveilling 2 every turn. It's not like you're Thrasiosing and putting cards in hands and then snowballing advantage, right? But the problem is, if those Thrasios decks that we're talking about play a Phyrexian Metamorph or a Phantasmal Image or something like that, and they get a copy of Seaborn Muse, they just do it better than you do, and that's been sort of a tough thing to grapple with in the deck. I don't know if it's black and white yet. I don't know if it's 100% going to be cut, but definitely had mixed feelings about the inclusion of Seaborn in this archetype, just because other people can use it better, as I mentioned. I love Flood Caller in this deck. Flood Caller untaps your Glarb, meaning that every single non-creature spell means you surveil 2 for every spell. If anything ever happened to Flood Caller, this deck becomes like, basically it goes from being like a solid tiered option to a fringe deck, I'm pretty sure, unfortunately. The same thing with Calling Ritual, right? Those cards are such an integral part of the game plan of this deck that I think it suffers so greatly if those cards have anything happen to them. That being said, though, I have so much fun with this deck. The fact that it has the ability to play the faster game plan, the fact that it can do the fast plan, the fact that it can switch to the grind plan if you really need it to. The deck just kind of does what you want it to when you need it to, right? It's a really good deck at slowing down, grinding, all that kind of stuff. But if you really need to jam in tough spots, then yeah, the deck will support you in doing so. So it's a ton of fun. Genuinely, it's like one of my favorite play styles I've had in a really long time. So truly love Glarb, and definitely going to be in my roster of decks for quite some time. I have a ton of fun with it, and it feels very comfortable. I mean, ending the Swiss with 17 points is definitely a point of pride for me. I started the event 2-0. The deck just felt super, super clean through a lot of the tournament, and a lot of the things with the list didn't feel like the deck was letting me down in any situations. The only time that I felt like it was a really tough spot was when I mulliganed down low and no one else did, and the other time was when I was in the pod I'd mentioned in Swiss with Max B, where it was like 3 Timna decks and me. Or I guess it wasn't 3 Timna decks, but it was 3 decks with Grand Abolisher and myself, right? And those situations definitely feel a lot more like you're falling without a parachute, and you got to really navigate how to land without breaking all your bones and whatnot. So the decks, as I mentioned, feeling very powerful, really, really fun deck to play, and I love that the value plan with Glarb is solid, but it's not like oppressive, and therefore you can focus on like more detrimental opponents at the table, and sort of just do the frog thing until you find a nice window for yourself. And that's the tough part with the deck, is that if you jam in the wrong window, the deck does not feel nearly as powerful. But if you're moving in the right spot, Glarb will provide. This is Colin's list. As I mentioned, Braden and Colin sharing the same exact list. This is their Not a Coper list that we talked about extensively earlier on. Congrats to Colin in the top 16, and we'll move on from there. We have the Ballad of William Tecumseh Sherman Marius, cEDH by Gold Saber Tooth. This is Gold Saber's list that he's done pretty well with over the course of the past few months, I guess. He's definitely won a couple events with this thing, and top 16 a few others. So It's been pretty sweet out here and seeing this list. Gold Saber had a 4-hour game with Max P and Freedom Waffle and Braden over the course of this tournament. So that top 16 match was obviously intensely crazy, and definitely one that could have ended with any player winning that game. Very, very crazy magic that was played over the course of this tournament. The Marnius Calgar list here is definitely a really sweet one. It has sort of the classic Esper stuff you would expect, things like Ranger Captain, Oracle, Consult, all that type of stuff. But Saber is not afraid to play some spice, right? We have Tivit in the 99 of this deck. You've got Hullbreaker Horror to use the fact that Marnius is actually an infinite colorless mana outlet, which is pretty sweet. You make 2 warriors, and then that allows you to draw a card with your commander. Emrakul in the 99. It seems like a lot of these Esper options love the spaghetti mom. And so Emrakul, very, very sweet to be able to take over people's turns. Tim almost won the top 16 with this Emrakul, but Waffle was able to give himself protection through the One Ring, and therefore make it so that, yeah, he was not able to have his turn taken for the win there. You've got some really cool value engines here, things like Rev, War Infiltrator, and Stridehanger Automaton basically create a combo in the deck in which you're able to sack a creature and then make 2 bodies. So basically, as you go through the loop, you pay 1 life for the sacrifice, and you're able to draw 2 cards off of Marnius, and then make treasures and Thopters equal to your life total. And I guess the Thopters end up being sacrificed. So you don't actually net Thopters as you're going through the process, but pretty sweet stuff. There's Ocelot Pride here in the deck, which is obviously super powerful card. Very, very sweet to see. And then really cool with Marnius on the battlefield. And when your strategy is a very token heavy strategy, getting the city's blessing and then doubling all your tokens that you made that turn ends up being pretty insanely strong. Like thinking about Smothering Tide and things like that. Gets very, very crazy. Worth noting that Tim had a pretty crazy record over the course of Swiss. Started off 4-0 with this deck, but unfortunately was not able to capitalize in the top 16. But super solid run with this archetype. You have Grim Hireling, Rev, as I said, generating lots of tokens, a lot of advantage, all that kind of stuff. He is on both Banishing Knack and Retraction Helix for the Flood Caller lines in this deck. So this deck definitely has no shortage of ways to try and push some wins here. It seems like in his older variation, he was a little bit heavier on like Basalt Monolith Infinite colorless combos. So kind of nice to see that he's off of those because they always struck me as a little bit unwieldy. We're on Time Sieve in the deck, not only because you have Tivit in the 99, but just generally because this deck makes a ton of tokens. And therefore, it's very, very easy to end in scenarios in which you can just manual through a few extra turns by just having a Time Sieve in the deck. Also worth noting, as came up in the top 16 match, that you can actually sacrifice your One Ring if it gets a little bit too out of hand, which did end up happening over the course of that game. Smothering Tithe is the best card in the deck, sort of hands down. Not really two ways to filter that. There's a Necro in the deck. This deck doesn't strike me as like a fantastic Necropotence deck. It is on Born as well as Valley Flood Caller and High Fae Trickster for sure. But the Necro lines maybe seem a little bit tight because a lot of the deck is full of these sort of Esper value picks as opposed to some of the more aggressive stormy cards that exist in the format. But you are on Dark and Cabal Ritual. Worth shutting out Plunge into Darkness, a card I haven't seen in quite some time, which is pretty interesting. It's basically pay life for a little bit of card selection, which at some points just becomes a tutor, right? There's Limb Duel's Vault, Plunge of Darkness, Waterlog Teachings, definitely some atypical tutors hanging out in this deck, able to provide a lot of advantage. But congrats to Gold for another top cut with this deck. It looks pretty sweet here, and yeah, some really cool stuff. And our last top 16 deck before we get to our top 4 is Jacob Wynn here with Flip It or Rip It. This is Narset Enlightened Master. This has been Jacob's project for quite some time and is one of the people mainly pushing this deck. Basically said he's going to keep playing this deck until he gets a win of a tournament on this deck, and has been really doing some amazing innovation with the list. Cool stuff here with Dovin Hand of Control, able to sort of slow your opponents down a little bit. That's a newer tech piece for the deck. Jace Willer Mystery is one of the main win conditions in the list. You have to ferry Time Raveler in here, but no Displacer Kitten. To ferry, just a way to get a Grand Abolisher style effect off of your Narset flips. On Grand Abolisher, on Voice of Victory, no Ranger Captain in this archetype, which is kind of interesting. Even if it's not necessarily for the one drop searching, just having another preventative effect would be pretty solid. But obviously, one thing to consider is that Ranger Captain, if you crack to prevent to silence on one of your turns, it becomes a lot worse when you go to your next turn and you're looping turns over and over again, and it no longer has an impact, right? Really cool to see Diamond Lion in the hand. The deck is definitely a turbo Narset strategy, right? So Jacob definitely has zero hesitation to throw his entire hand away to get a Narset on the battlefield as early as turn 2, turn 3, and definitely is willing to do that as part of the main strategy. Grand Arbiter, able to double reduce Narset down to 4, as well as slow your opponents a little bit, add a little bit of tempo on your side. And then we get to, okay, what do you flip into in Narset? And here we hit the source trees. We're talking about extra turns, draw through your entire deck, uncounterable removal spell plus extra turn plus draw 4, extra turn, flip the top 8, cast a bunch of them for free, extra turn, plus steal a bunch of stuff, extra turn, Mind's Desire. Sick. Apparently Jacob had a Mind's Desire with Storm 9 on the stack when our top 4 player from this pod, Jason, was actually able to win over the top of him with a Boron line, which is just about as heartbreaking as you can have it for an Narset line. Extra turn, extra combat. So a lot of crazy stuff here with this list. On Commandeer for a little bit of the interaction pieces. I feel like some people would expect that Narset doesn't play a decent amount of interaction, but the interaction actually does work pretty well with the list. Same disclaimer as earlier, Gifts Ungiven was not in this list at time of tournament, but it is now, and so great, you get to see the list post Gifts Ungiven. And apart from that, a lot of the stuff you might expect. Godfrey Statue may be one of the spicier options here. Oh, sweet, and Paladin class, which is one that we actually talked about, funny enough, over the course of the weekend, which I'm pretty sure was not in Jacob's deck at the course of the tournament. So let me check and see what switches were made for those. Yeah, okay, so some of the lands were moved around. God Pharaoh Statue was re-added, Tezzeret was taken out, and then Paladin class was added in. Okay, cool. Interesting. Surprised Tezzeret was taken out, but some interesting stuff there from this list. Yeah, this deck is very, very cool, very sweet. Also worth noting that there's also the Mind Over Matter one ring combo is another backup combo to draw through your entire deck until you can play that Jace, or you're doing the classic Underworld Breach stuff with the deck. Underworld Breach, Lion's Eye Diamond, Brain Freeze, all et cetera, able to win the game by milling through your entire deck and then playing that Jace as your primary win condition. I believe at one point there might have been a Blind Obedience in the deck, but it seems like that is no longer the case here with this deck. But yeah, super sweet stuff here from Jacob. The deck is absolutely awesome. You love to see it, and provides a ton of value while also just dumping a bunch of insanely powerful cards over and over again to take a bunch of extra turns and then hopefully generate a ton of value with Narset on the battlefield. So congrats, Jacob, for the top 16 with this deck. Ended Swiss with 21 points, meaning 4 wins, 1 draw, which is obviously a very impressive record, especially during a 6-round event. So congrats, Jacob, for the top cut. Now, while you're watching this video, before we get to our top 4, I want to remind you to do coaching here on Comedian MTG. And as part of this announcement, we're going to make a more formal announcement a little bit later, but I'm going to be reducing my rates for a little bit. The idea being that, one, as I mentioned earlier this year, I want to promote accessibility to coaching, and it's something that I am really passionate about. I love teaching, I love what I do, and I want to make sure people have access to it. And the other part is the economy is a little crazy right now, and I want to be respectful of that. And I really want people to still have the opportunity to participate in this service while not maybe stressing as much about some of the upfront for it. So if you're curious about any of the details of that, I'm going to drop, hopefully by the time I'm back from my wedding, a sort of really extensive breakdown of everything for coaching, all that kind of stuff on the channel, because I haven't done a really in-depth one in quite some time. So If you're curious about any of those details, feel free to message me at comedianmtg@gmail.com or any of the places in my link tree down below. If you're adding me on Discord, please do through the Comedian MTG Discord, just so you can make sure you have the right person, because there's some other people who have Comedian MTG gamer tags out there, and that would obviously be very awkward if you were messaging someone else. So yeah, let me know through any of the places, either once again in my email or my link tree down below. Dreams had a very interesting comeback run. One of our Blue Farm players here in this event ended up getting into top 16 with the only player who only had 2 wins and 2 draws. The only 12-point player was able to make top 16. All the other 12s bubbled out. 13 was the cutoff that everyone expected, but as I mentioned, Dreams was the 112-pointer and proceeded to make the top 16 of this event and then win that top 16 match to end up in the finals. Playing Blue Farm variant, they've been known for playing this variant for quite some time. Definitely one of the more proactive versions, right? On Wheel and Windfall, Jessica's Will, the Flare of Duplication lines with Darcy and Facebreaker and things like that. We ended up playing over the course of the tournament, and at one point we were looking to grab a board wipe to handle a Ragthras' board state, and they were like, "Oh, actually, we don't play any in this variation," which was somewhat funny that ended up being the case. But yeah, definitely some pretty sweet stuff here from this list. Much similar to Hunter's list earlier, sort of the more proactive style of Blue Farm. Nothing super crazy in the deck that stands out in particular. March of Swirling Wisp, occasionally a choice that people don't make, but definitely a lot of the lower to the ground stuff, playing Rain of Filth, the free bounce spell and snapback. So a lot of ways to push when this deck needs to. You're on the Necro lines, the Ad Nauseam lines, et cetera, et cetera. A very proactive Blue Farm variation here, making the top 4. We have Wounded Satellite here with Ragthras. This is a Ragthras build that I guess we're going to take a second to talk about Ragthras, because this deck, I'm pretty sure, has moved up to being the top 3 decks in the format. I think there were a lot of times in which I thought Ragthras was just underperforming in general as an archetype, and I would have stuck by that opinion pretty hard. But I think through the work that Sam Black and a number of other people have done with the archetype, the Aboro Breeze color lines in particular, made it so that this deck is just consistently performing in a number of different capacities. Not every player is performing with it at every time, but for a significant majority of players, this deck is performing quite exceptionally well. It's definitely a list I'm looking to take to an event sometime soon, just to give it a run myself. But yeah, it's definitely a list that folks should be on the lookout for. How does this list win? Basically, you are trying to generate a bunch of bodies so that your Gaia's Cradle taps for a lot of mana. Your Gaia's Cradle is going to be tapping for a lot, and then you can untap it with things like Deserted Temple that allows you to untap a land, or Minamo that allows you to untap a legendary permanent, being this land. You also have Growing Rites of Itlamok, a second copy of Gaia's Cradle. Now, you may notice that this deck is low on red in general, right? There is really just a few red cards in the deck, and those are basically there to support the Stormier Breach stuff, right? So it's Gamble, Wheel, 2 spells that you never need to put mana into, and then Underworld Breach and Song of Creation, right? It's a very, very Simic heavy archetype that then transitions into a red archetype, basically, if you want to resolve an Underworld Breach. Speaking of Cradle and Tappers, we also have Candelabra in this deck. There's some others around too. Breach and Cradle are sort of the name of the game, but the idea is that you vomit a ton of value onto the board with Gaia's Cradle, and you're able to accrue value over and over and over again with the archetype. Displacer Kitten plus Cloud of Fairies obviously gets insanely powerful. Cloud of Fairies in general is just one of the best cards in the deck. Also, the reason that they play so many clones in the deck, because you're able to go flesh duplicate your Cloud of Fairies, Phantasmal Image your Cloud of Fairies, Phyrexian Metamorph your Cloud of Fairies, copies on copies on copies on copies on bodies on bodies on bodies on bodies. So the breach lines are one of the win conditions. As I mentioned, the Aboro Breeze collar line a little bit earlier. Basically, if you have 6 creatures on the board, you're able to return a land you control to your owner's hand to a tap target land. So to untap the land we're talking about, you're untapping your Gaia's Cradle or Itlamok, meaning you're able to tap it for 6 green mana, and the land you're bouncing back is Talon Gates of Madara, which allows you to have the ability to pay the 4 to put it into the battlefield from your hand, right? So you're bouncing the land, playing it again, bouncing the land, playing it again. You are able to tap the Talon Gates 4 mana between those loops, right? Which is why you only need 6 creatures to go infinite with that situation. And making 6 creatures is really not that hard in this deck. First of all, there's a lot of creatures in general, but you're also on things like Chatterstorm. You're also on things like Springheart and Tuco. This list generates a bunch of passive value and then is able to go over the top of your opponents over and over again and provide a ton of value. You've got a ton of different ways to tutor for lands, which is good because you have a lot of value lands, like we already covered. You have things like Sowing Mycospawn. This variation, I think, is on a few less land tutors than some of the other ones in general, but definitely land tutors are a frequent part of the deck. You're on crop rotation, things like that. So a lot of ways to get your Cradle on the battlefield, gain a ton of value, and then go infinite with your Thrasios and go through the majority of your deck. The deck provides a ton of value. It gets very, very crazy, goes over the top pretty hard. And yeah, it's just one of those decks that if you are playing against it, it's a deck where I would maybe prioritize Beseju in your opening hand a little bit harder. I was able to play against multiple Ragthras builds over the course of this tournament, and I kept Beseju in my openers multiple times. The I think, despite it being a 2.5 hour game, our top 16 matchup, I legitimately think that the play that affected the entire game so much was me trying to Beseju the Cradle as soon as it came down during the course of the game, because I was respecting the deck a great deal, and Max having the deflecting swat available, of course, to be able to push that into a different direction. The game sort of fundamentally changed at that point already. So yeah, definitely tech in your Cradle answers. I think this deck is very real. I think it's top 3 decks of the format at the very least, and I think it's going to continue to show up and basically push a ton of value and grind really, really hard. I think it is one of those decks that does have a high skill ceiling, high skill floor to it. And there are going to be players who play it and just don't have the same level of success with it. But that being said, in good players' hands, I would expect that this deck is just absolutely a menace. And one thing I think that needs to sort of be talked about with the deck is when people are, especially people who like to reveal their hand a lot, they often will reveal that they don't have a ton of value with the deck in that hand, right? And I find with this deck, if the Cradle plan is online, you're often looking at multiple Thrasios activations per turn. If there's a Seedborn Muse, it's multiple Seedborn activations plus that plus a turn cycle, right? And so with that being said, like it's a deck that can easily go from almost no advantage to a ton of advantage when the engine gets online very, very quickly. And it's a deck that's board wipe resilient, right? In our top 16 match, the board was wiped 3 separate times, and this deck was still able to end of the day. So definitely a very powerful archetype and one that you should be on the lookout for. Speaking of which, our other top 4 deck is Pigeon here with Angry Anklebiter Pigeon style. This is Pigeon's version of the Rog Thrasios list. Let's give the lists a little comparison. So it's about 10 card differences between these two lists. The Godspeed list is on Basic Forest, Basic Island, Time Twister, and Prismatic Vista, and Gemstone Caverns, which is interesting that Pigeon's list is not. Pigeon, I talked about him not being on the One Ring. It's definitely a choice I disagree with. But obviously, Pigeon was able to make top 4 with the list, even without being on the One Ring. I specifically call out the One Ring in particular because that is how Pigeon beat us in the Fishbowl on one of our win-in matches. And so definitely, specifically with the One Ring, like it was a turn 2 One Ring scenario that absolutely won him the game. So it's definitely a little surprised to see him not on that. And then Relic of Legends, which has just been sort of a Rogthras staple for a hot minute. In Pigeon's list, it's a snow island and a snow forest, right? Not much of a huge difference there. Pigeon's on Windfall versus Time Twister, which is not another one of a huge difference. I do kind of like the Time Twister to fully reset everything, especially against the other graveyard decks, but also understanding that you're a Breach deck, you might not want to have that. Pigeon's also on Tempt with Discovery, a really interesting way to go put a bunch of lands on. I've noticed more Rogthras pilots are on this as of late. And this is one of those scenarios in which every time you give that deck another land, it's a bad situation. So you literally just have to let them go put their cradle onto the battlefield tapped. And oh, actually, no, it's not tapped. It's just untapped. Yeah. Yeah. Basically, if the spell resolves, you basically can never take the offer with this deck, because if they go get a cradle, they can then go grab something like Mysterized Village or a second cradle, or a cradle untapper effect, right? Like it's a bad time almost no matter what. So definitely never take the offer with this card if you're playing as Ragthras. And then we have the Pigeon special here, which is sudden substitution. This split second swaparoo spell that Pigeon will die on the hill of. It allows you to exchange control of target non-creature spell and target creature. Then the spell's controller may choose new targets for it. So if you want to take a creature from your opponent, you can put a spell in the stack and then swap them. If you want to take a spell from your opponent, you can trade them for one of your silly Ragthras tokens that you have on the battlefield. It is a very quick way to swap control over something that you need for something that you absolutely do not need. So it's a wild card. We give Pigeon crap for this card all the time, and yet they've been able to make the top 4 of 2 pretty big events with this card in the deck. Now, does this card actually have a lot to do with that performance? Who's to say? But if there's a deck that can afford a 4-drop that's an instant that does something crazy, it's probably Ragthras, because you've got mana for days. So very, very funny card seeing here in this Pigeon variant. And then the rest of the differences are just lands and Malevolent Rumble, as Pigeon likes the Breach plan a little bit more heavily than Wounded does, and therefore is including some cards that do a little bit more for that purpose. But congrats to Pigeon on your top 4. Really cool player. Made second place at both of these events, and very, very clearly found a deck that's very comfortable for him. He's been a good player for quite some time, but the deck maybe hasn't been synced up as much, and now is very clearly performing on a list that works well for him. And funny enough, the player who helped and volunteered a ton of hours to help get this event online also ended up taking it down. So we have Freedom Waffle here with his no bad card Kinnan list. He's been really on a tear with this list lately, and able to perform very, very well with it. I'm going to compare it to his friend Dean's from earlier and see what the main differences are here in these 2 lists. Okay, so there's a 3-card difference here with these variations. The no bad card variant is on Misdirection, Dispel, and Exotic Orchard, whereas Kinney Boy variation from Dean is on Mana Drain, Delay, and Willow Rush Verge. So not a whole ton of variation here, just more preferences of counterspells here in this archetype. Obviously, Waffle preferring a lower to the ground version, where Dean is saying, yeah, I'll take my 2 mana counter spells because I want them to be a little bit of harder answers to some of the problems that are going around. I talked with Waffle about the mana base a lot. He definitely makes some strange choices with the lands, playing a lot of like 5-color lands in Kinnan, but it ends up working out a great deal, and it's mostly just a choice to have very consistent mana on the deck and prioritizing that versus some of the clunkiness that those cards can potentially provide in other areas. But yeah, congrats to Waffle for taking down the tournament on this list. He's been, as I mentioned, on a tear with this Kinnan variation. It's the grindy one we talked about earlier, where you're trying to Ristic, Mirror Maid, Copy Enchantment, just really dig into that play pattern, draw sort of a comically unfair amount of cards throughout the course of the game, and then just use Kinnan for the massive mana battery that it is in the command zone. Thank you all for watching this video. What did you all think was one of the more interesting lists of this tournament? I mean, there was some absolute spice out here in the top 16. The decks available were definitely pretty solid, definitely a healthy blue farm representation here in this top 16, but at the same time, we had things like 6-mana Narset, Marnius, Glarb, Zerda, Krark Silas, right? And even the Ishai Kodama variation that we saw earlier. So definitely some pretty sweet stuff out here in the top 16 of this deck. As I mentioned, some really cool stuff happening in the course of this tournament. I know there's been some conversations lately about the problematic draws and stuff like that, but if you look, like, a lot of the players who ended up doing well over the course of this tournament didn't really have that many draws attached to them, right? There was a couple of the players who had an extra draw here and there, right? But apart from that, I don't think the problem is as bad as it has been over the past few months. There's definitely a lot more people putting wins on the stack, which I do think is part of the solution to the problem, is that you got to actually go for the wins instead of trying to grind a little bit harder. But thank you all for watching this video. Super curious to hear your thoughts on this event in the comments down below. Appreciate y'all. And if you maybe don't hear from me next week, I'm going to do my best to get a video to Callahan before I leave. But if you don't hear from me for a couple days, I will be gone from the 30th of April to the 6th of May for my wedding. So if y'all don't hear from me in that time, it's because I'll be there, but I will be back in office May 7th doing all of the stuff, doing all the coaching, things like that. Feel free to still send me messages, everything like that. I'm super happy to chat with everyone. But thank you all for watching these videos. I appreciate you so much, and I will catch you next time. Peace.